computer. Greetings all, it's Gerald Clark with Seventh Planet Broadcasting, and once again I'm joined with the fantastic author Julian Polzin. He's the author of Beyond Psychotherapy, The Laughing God Behind the Mask, and if you haven't picked up a copy, do so. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I don't know, that doesn't look much like you, Julian, on the back. You look kind of, you kind of got that, you got that European slicky boy look going on there. I'm not sure. Okay. Anything you want to say to the audience before we get started? I think you've been well received by my people and other people who've taken a listen to what you had to say. So.
Yeah, I really enjoy sharing because if I'm inspired, I want to assist others in being inspired. Since everyone has deep down within them has access to the source intelligence, and I think the one that the topic that fascinates us is how to make that happen. Like, what experience leads us there, right?
Will you reintroduce what you do on an everyday basis so people know you? We don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I want to refresh people what it is you do. You wrote a book called Beyond Psychotherapy. Tell them about your credentials and what you're doing on your daily reality versus doing a show like this with me.
Right. Well, the basic thing is I started practicing psychotherapy with a very scientific mindset. But when I started having mystical experiences, I realized the limitations of what I'm doing. So as such, I had to expand the way I would, let's say, address crisis with people, because let's say many psychotherapists might be rather technical, and there's nothing wrong with that. There are many techniques that work, but this is a framework that often limits us if we have a certain school of thought. So when I had my first mystical experience and I developed a meditation ability, so to say, or I rediscovered it because it was already there, and I started teaching this to my clients, I realized that they got better way quicker. It took them half the usual time, in a sense, to go into a state where they do not suffer anymore. So I got fascinated with that, and since then I'm on the journey of spiritual discovery. Yeah, applying techniques, learning, experimenting, sharing, trying to inspire.
Can you, for instance, how long would you say it would typically take you with a new client, with drugs or without drugs? I don't know how that works. That they would actually come to the sensation that you're describing, or the knowing of who they are beyond the ego that's been taught to them. How long does that generally take?
See, that's powerful, because not long. And this is the message I really like to share, because many of us read. Yeah, we give ourselves intellectual food. We read one book after another book after another book, and we read books from people who are really legit. If you read Eckhart Tolle, if you read Alan Watts, if you read Terence McKenna, yeah, or many of the modern spiritual teachers, they know what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. But the issue being is we are reading about people going into the water while sitting at the beach. And the thing is, when you have techniques and you start practicing them, it's surprising how quickly we find a layer or another frequency or channel through which information travels. So for a lot of people, just when they start practicing mindfulness exercises daily, it might take them, let's say, a few weeks to be able to observe their ego. Mm-hmm. And this is powerful, because the moment you observe your ego, you realize, I'm not my ego. Anything you cannot observe, you are not. Mm-hmm. It's that simple.
Mm-hmm. Say that one more time. Say that one more time for people.
Right. Everything that you can observe, you are not.
Yeah. And this points to the idea of all things that can be detected with our senses are illusory and transient. Correct?
Yes.
Who you are
That's
is
right.
What you can perceive with your senses. And we ended up a show where we were talking about the evolution of consciousness, what you and I did together, where we made a profound statement that the truth cannot be accessed through our existing senses.
Right.
It could only be done through mindless transition to a different mental state, which is a frequency, and that can't be done in your normal consciousness. So, right. So anyway, we kind of left at that. So it couples with what you said about the transient illusory of whatever you see or can experience as part of the material simulator, but it's not who you are. So we like to think, as a prime example, you work your whole life as a psychotherapist or an engineer or a doctor, and you take on so much of that persona of that's who I am because that's what I do. But that's not who you are. It's just just what you're doing for now, and that could change, right? So continue on. We were starting to talk about dialoguing, about going from the specific to a generalization about what we've seen in the process of coming to mindfulness, and then going to the next level. What is this daily, when you start talking about a daily practice of having to do something, that scares people, okay? I remember in my practice, if I sent somebody home and said, as an example of something, try playing with this. If you gave it as a game to play with, they'd be more likely to do it. If you sent them home with homework, they got that at school. They didn't want to do that. So you see what I'm saying? So how do you bridge this opening to mindfulness to something bigger? And you have some great ideas.
Well, the thing is, when we, for example, say, I must do this, I have to do this, I should do this, all of this is programming. This is matrix thought, so to speak. So when, for example, we see someone that we think we identify as an authority figure, and suddenly we say to them, well, if they make a suggestion that we could do a certain thing, yeah, I must do this, I should do this, I have to do this, it's never authentic. We're insincere with ourselves. So the thing is, what I tell my clients when I suggest certain meditation techniques to them, and they say, yeah, I probably have to do this, and I say, no, you don't have to do a single thing. Everything is optional. Yeah, have to, it's not sincere. This is the ego mind. This is how we're programmed to think. We have to educate ourselves. We have to pay taxes. Yeah, we have to get a loan. We have to pay mortgages. This is fear programming. Yeah, it's forceful. So when you understand that you cease to be forceful when you're trying to consciously interact with people, surrendering your own ego, therefore allowing them to be, no matter how they express themselves, and then in a sense to encourage very small techniques first, nothing complicated. It's just, for example, just telling them, hey, what about you spend an hour in a park without a goal, without having to do something, without having to solve a problem. You just sit and you watch your breath. That's all you need to do.
No, wait, can I have my cellular phone with me?
See, there it goes. There it goes. Like, where does the need for input come from? Yeah, the need for input comes from an unconscious need to self-medicate. Because what happens in the silence, what happens when we don't perceive stimulus all the time, we become self-aware. So when we become self-aware, we suddenly realize, oh, there's this voice in the mind. There are those emotions coming up as a result of the voice, the anxiety arising. And suddenly people go back to their smartphones, go back to their computers, because indeed it is compulsive. They don't want to be on the smartphone. That's not it. They can't help it for the very simple reason, because when they face the silence, they face the ego death. And the ego wants to avoid the experience of death. But guess what? Death is liberation. So in a sense, any attempts at meditation, as I said before previously, is a conscious attempt at death. I want to know if the mind calms down, if my emotions calm down, if my daydreaming calms down, if all of those layers, because I allow them, everything I allow, I start transcending. So when I allow them, piece by piece, I get into deeper frequencies of perception. So
let me ask something. Why do you think allowing them causes transcendence? This was kind of typical of Eckhart Tolle's teaching. Do you think it's because of the principle of resistance is persistence, so that you stop resisting it, otherwise it persists? Do you think that has anything to do with the allow versus? Because it's kind of
the thing is, it is simply a habit. It is simply a habit. When you get born in modern societies and you're programmed, socially engineered from a very early age on to have a certain mindset, a discriminatory mindset, it's in a sense it's something that you have done for maybe 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. And now you're trying to do something else. And what's going to happen is a lot of people go into meditation with having a goal, because this is how they're being programmed. I need to have success. It needs to have a certain outcome. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, they want to stop thinking by using thought. This can't work, right? Mm-hmm. It's a little bit like this. You're sitting at water, and you keep trembling the water over and over, and you can't see your reflection because the water is rough, right? So when I stop trembling the water, and I can only do this by allowing the chaos in the water, because when I allow it, it calms down by itself. Mm-hmm. But if I do an active effort of calming down the water, I'm interacting with the water, I'm going to stir it up again. Yeah. So when I'm in a state of allowing, let's say there are mean thoughts, angry thoughts, fearful thoughts, when I interact with them by agreeing or disagreeing, I give them energy and I invite them to stay. Mm-hmm. And this is what people struggle with. Yeah. They are automatically in resistance to the thought process, because this is what the ego does. It starts judging the thought process. Mm-hmm. So it says, this is bad, this is wrong, this is good. So through the judgment, we come in a state of resistance, and that is stirring up the water over and over. Yeah? Judgment stirs up the water. Mm-hmm. Once we figure that out, because judgment is the social program.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And then tracking your likes and dislikes on a social media platform. So right. You get your little dopamine rush from all of that. Yeah, they very much understand our psychology, don't they?
Yes. Yes, and the thing is about social media, it is designed in a way to keep our consciousness trapped. This is pretty obvious.
Talk about that a little bit, because I've listened to the designer of Facebook and stuff telling his people, stay the hell off this thing because of what it's designed to do. Talk about it a little bit. People will be shocked to hear this that have never heard this.
Well, the thing is that we're about to realize it doesn't matter like what kind of apps you have on your smartphone or when you're on the internet. You get constantly notifications, nonstop. So basically, it's invasive, is it not? There is something that says, think about what we are offering you to think about. You're constantly, in a sense, being bombarded with input. And this is exactly what it does. It stirs up the water over and over and over. And Facebook, in a sense, is an extension of the ego, because now you have a virtual ego that you need to take care of. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, if you're already in your private life, if you're already thinking about, how are people perceiving me? And you're also already struggling with authenticity. What does happen when you're on a social media platform that is worldwide accessible? And then, in a sense, the ego image, the self-concept that you have of yourself, you suddenly creating an virtual externalization of that as well. And now you're trapped in, I need to constantly control my self-image.
That's why I need an avatar. I knew it. That's right.
That's the thing. I mean, you already have one, right? But then you add another one, and that is a virtual avatar on top of the physical avatar that you're already experiencing. Yeah, double trouble. Yeah, if that makes sense. Yeah. So when a society tells you from very early age on, as a little kid, when you were creative, when you were intuitive, but you are raised in a fearful society that is programmed to fit into a certain social engineered system, then you experience punishment. Now, what do you figure out as a kid? Well, if I experience punishment being myself, I pretend to be someone else, and that's the birth of the ego. Yeah, is playing an act in order to avoid pain. Guess what? At a certain point, when you have played that act long enough and it becomes a habit, you confuse the habit, the program that you've created for yourself. Mm-hmm. And at a certain point, you confuse your Facebook profile for yourself, your Instagram profile for yourself. Now you think, I need to take care of myself. Guess what? You will constantly feel endangered, because these extensions of who you think you are illusionary. They are impermanent. They're going to fade away. They don't mean anything in a cosmological context. Mm-mm. Right?
Right. Yeah, I agree. So let's talk about what does matter in a long-term cosmological context, according to Julian, from your experience. What does matter? Is
Law of,
it
law and wisdom.
the traits of the 7 vices and virtues? I mean, are you shooting for the virtuous character traits of what's perceived to be a hero or heroine? Because that's truly, ultimately, what seems to be long lasting, is the sculpting of your energy based on this material experience. So you get your lessons, right?
Yes, I mean the hero theme. We talked about this before, of course. Many movies have the hero theme, where you have a hero that, let's say, opposes the establishment, expressing himself freely despite the perceived consequences. And you see this in the writings of the great mythical scholar Joseph Campbell, for example. We spoke about this before as well. The thing is, what people probably struggle with understanding is we are trapped in an idea of cause and effect. And cause and effect traps us in time. This is the thinking of, if I play pool billiard, right, and I hit a ball and it hits the next ball, yeah, and it's A, B, C, D, E. When in truth, within your state of consciousness, you're equally manifesting an external reality. So there is no inside or outside. This is what you have been made to believe, that there is an inside or outside. So when you think in cause and effect and in that kind of logic, then you're thinking, well, in order to be well, I need to, let's say, function in the system to make money, to take care of my family and all that stuff. Yes, on a lower level of consciousness. When in truth, at a certain point, when you realize that whatever beliefs you have, memories you have that you attach to, energies within the system that you might be unaware of, they manifest an external reality that always mirrors your state of consciousness. So the liberation does not come from thinking you need to control the external environment. This is exactly the trap. To need to think, I need to be in control. So when you say, Julian, are you shooting for something? Well, if I'm shooting for something, I'm looking for something that is not me. I'm looking for an object, a concept, an idea of liberation. All of that is not me, and it will lead me back to search in the external world, to be trapped in the simulator, because I think I need to add something to myself.
That's right.
Right? It's about removing the obscuration. And removing the obscuration is realization.
Yeah, that's exactly the thing, is we feel like we're insufficient, probably because of the insecurities we've had from the very beginning of not knowing who we are, such that we have to keep adding to ourselves. And we think that's going to do something. It really is usually only adding elements and layers to the ego is what that is normally. But and what you're saying is that the solution is not adding to yourself or seeking outside yourself. It's finding that place, that experience where the finite meets the infinite, and that then you know the rules of the game personally, because you remember them. They've always been there. It's not something new. Right. And then you do it intuitively. And by the way, I want to talk about a little bit there. It's part of what I've seen, and I probably was a little too scientific about quantized energy and stuff like that the first time we talked. But as it relates to consciousness, I see consciousness as being segmented into levels, which is very interesting, because the ability to perceive cause and effect is limited by the consciousness scope that you're trapped in, or that you're currently in, whether you're trapped in it or not. So it reminds me of, you cannot visualize something in your mind that you've never been exposed to generally. So the idea of an experience of you beyond the material is not something people can visualize unless they've experienced it. And this is where the kind of the chasm comes, I guess, is for those who've experienced it, it's not a belief, it's a knowing. For those who haven't, I'm going to watch the special on finding a ghost that was haunting some house, because maybe there's some proof that there's life after death. I don't know. And there's those two camps, I think.
In let's say, when it comes to, for example, the power of synchronicities, because this is kind of what you have been touching on a little bit with what you said. When it comes to the power of synchronicities, they're not explainable by laws of time. So I give you an example. I accessed a past life memory, and I knew I had a Chinese Buddhist teacher, and I knew his name. So what I was trying to do, I would sit down in meditation, I would activate my third eye, and I would see if, let's say, from the astral if I could get in some sort of communication. Now, the interesting thing happened that I saw a wooden house in a jungle. There were some wooden benches. There was a Chinese Go game. And I was playing a Go game with someone. A few days later, one of my friends who used to live with me, who also works in the field of psychotherapy, had some stuff that he needed to collect. And suddenly he said, "Hey, Julian, by the way, do you want to have this Chinese Go game?" And he just gives me.
What is that, by the way? Go.
It's a form of Asian chess.
Okay.
Yeah, with the white and black stones.
Right.
Right. So let's say a few days later, and he probably doesn't even know why he gave it to me. He just gives me the Chinese Go game. So how do you make that connection? Mm-hmm. Well, if you believe in a universe where you are an entity that is separated from the whole, this doesn't make a lot of sense. To the ego, that doesn't make sense. But when you have synchronicities keep coming in and they defy what you think about the laws of time or space, as you have been taught in school, as you have been taught in this society, these experiences are defying that. And at first the ego might be in resistance and say, well, that's a glitch in the matrix, that's a fluke, it can't be real, I'm imagining it. Well, if it happens to you 10 times, 20 times, it keeps recurring. Yeah. And at a certain point of a state of consciousness, what you realize, for example, there's a certain topic that you're currently dealing with, maybe on a psychological level. And when you then break the pattern, you go out and, for example, you go into a bookstore and strangely you find the perfect book that correlates with your question.
Mm-hmm. Just practically jumps off the shelf to you, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So once we have, let's say, when we have those experiences, when our intuition is developed, then suddenly we start perceiving those phenomena. But of course, for that, the no mind state needs to be there, because if you do not empty yourself of your beliefs and concepts, nothing new can emerge within that space. This is where creative power comes from. Now, news, social media, everything tells you, you got to pay attention. Pay attention to this, pay attention to that. But the real power comes from, what do you focus on? What are you doing with your awareness? Are you focusing on fear? Are you focusing on watching news about war? Are you focusing about watching news about economy? And this traps you on the level of survival fear. This traps you on the biological intelligence level. And guess what? What you are going to manifest as reality will exactly mirror your state of consciousness.
Yeah, that's interesting you bring that up. I would pin you down and ask you to define interesting, but would you really generalize and look at somebody taking in a certain genre, being attracted to a certain thing, if you pay attention to what you're paying attention to and ask you and just be with that, you don't have to judge it, but it's kind of a meta awareness thing. It might shock you to see the pattern, and also it might draw you into that synchronicity that's trying to reach out to you, because what it's interesting to you for a reason. Okay, so interesting in my experience, that term is very overused and majorly misused and misunderstood. People say it all the time. Oh, that's interesting. Listen someday and see how many times you hear it. Well, why? What does that mean, and why are you saying that? Number one, it caught your attention some way, and it means something to you, has some significance to you. You may not be able to figure out what it is, whether it's good or bad, but it has interest to you, and it's probably because it's something that's part of your path to figure out a piece of the string, a piece of the synchronicity, a piece of the puzzle. So I always recommend paying attention to what you're paying attention to, because therein lies a lot of the patterns of what you need to figure out, especially in your shadow work, like what you were talking about in this process. Do you want to kind of migrate back toward going from suddenly figuring out, hey, there's another reality through mindfulness, to some of the things that you and I both do or talk about?
Yeah, sure.
And you know, I'm like you. I don't want people hung up on techniques. Yes, get the experience, but however it works for you, if it gets you to the goal, then that's your technique, and maybe you're going to be the next person to teach it another way to do it. But you're not saying this is the only way. You're saying, hey, this kind of the map I used didn't work for me. Use it if you want, like that. That's how I kind of see technique, because it's different for a lot of people. It's good to have structure to start, and for some people that need structure, like if you're not good at exercising, maybe the military experience of forcing you to do it regimented style would change your opinion about it when you got an opportunity to do it on your own, right? Like that. So anyway, so let's talk a little bit about this.
Well, the thing about systems is systems, we build them, conceptual systems of understanding, were ways of mapping out our experience. So in a sense, we could translate it to other beings who at that point in time might not be able to access that experience. So people who were evolved in certain areas, in the area of science, in the area of art or music or whatever you do, if you evolved, you in a sense, and then people are going to ask you, well, how did you get there? And then you start creating a system out of it with concepts in order to give people a map, like a certain basic guideline of how to get somewhere. Now, of course, then at a certain point, when you start with a foundation, so to speak, we are all on our very unique journey of the evolution of our consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So as such, we will be drawn to certain systems and ideas at a certain point of our state of consciousness. And what we, let's say, touched on a little bit, for example, we have certain mainstream spiritual teachers who have done tremendous work by initiating people to the no-mind experience. So they, in a sense, had the foot in the door, and from that moment on, evolution becomes conscious. Now they have a chance of starting to integrate and be on their own path. So, of course, one of the greatest to ever do this is Eckhart Tolle. So, but what I found out when I went into the no-mind space, at a certain point, I started downloading knowledge. Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, well, whatever mainstream spiritual teachers have been teaching currently does not benefit me anymore, because suddenly I'm like, in a sense, diving into the complexity of phenomena that where I suddenly realize, oh, I need a system. And suddenly a system comes to me and expresses itself through me. Right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the interesting thing is that systems, as long as we see them as tools, as temporary tools for a current state of consciousness, they do not limit us. When we create beliefs out of them, they start limiting us. Mm-hmm. So that's why I don't care what religious profession someone has, what belief system they are attached to. Talk to those people that make you uncomfortable. They make you uncomfortable for a reason. They make you uncomfortable because there's an egoic attachment within ourselves to describe our perspective in a certain way. Mm. And there we stop our evolution, because we say, maybe I define myself as a Buddhist now. Yeah. Well, I said it in my book very clearly, and I mean that very directly, is a genuine Buddhist has to abandon Buddhism to come to full realization. Because at a certain point, let's say, when you use a certain framework to get going, to develop a practice, once you become intuitive, you can let go of that framework.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. That's kind of the idea of killing the Buddha, is not holding a concept outside of yourself that's not yourself, and almost in an idolizing sense, that I could never become that. And then you finally realize that you can become whatever you think you are. Right? You get to decide that. So anyway.
Well, whatever you think you are is not you, because it's a self-concept. This is where it gets difficult for people, because they can't wrap their minds around it, because minds can't do it.
Right. Well, we get influenced from our higher selves onto what roles that we might need to play to benefit our fellow humans. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, how that starts happening? Because it goes from an egoic, serving yourself kind of mission in this life to when you wake up somewhat through this process, is that you realize the only real reason to be here is to be of assistance to the mass of humanity and leave some improvement, some technique, some portion of the map on the dialogue of the wall for everyone else, in a sense. Talk about that a little bit. I know you have something to say about it.
Well, I think that this is something that we very quickly realize when we experience something beyond what we call physical reality. Because from that moment on, I think the breakthrough came for me by starting to discover past life memory. And there are times, let's say, where I experience it very vivid, where I have flashbacks of situations that directly relate to my current life. So once I had, in a sense, the past life memory, but I also had a psychedelic experience where I saw myself, how I look without a physical body. And what was, in a sense, mind-blowing to me at the time was that it appeared realer than being in the physical reality. Mm-hmm. It was highly complex. It is, let's say, if we would speak of it in terms of resolution, beyond what you can perceive here. So when you make an experience beyond physical reality, the interesting thing is that there is a sense of liberation, because you know, no matter what happens here, this remains. And I think what added to it was seeing my own death. So I had an experience where I saw myself dying in Japan in some sort of temple. And what's very, very powerful with that experience was that my then wife is my current wife.
Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it?
So
you're living a really amazing life of synchronicities, and that starts happening after. Did it start happening before or after you wrote your first book? Did it start happening after or before? Or did it happen?
It happened before
with the meditation.
It is a result of several things. What I would like to encourage people is not to be in resistance to the ego. So not try to get rid of ego. Don't punish yourself because you're scared. Don't punish yourself because you might struggle with certain things. The thing is, the ego is a layer, and there are, let's say, other intelligences. And when we start aligning all of those intelligences through certain exercises, we stop being in resistance to any layer of who we are. We stop being in resistance to things that come from the subconscious mind. We stop being in resistance to things that come from the waking mind. All of that, in a sense, when you accept it, you start transcending it. So you start diving into these frequencies, and then mystical experience becomes possible. But at first, you need to cease the resistance to the simulator. You need to cease the resistance to thought. You need to cease the resistance to shame, guilt. So once we do that, once we accept, for example, being afraid, once we accept feeling ashamed, once we accept that the ego is structured in a certain way, our deeper intelligence will make itself known by, for example, giving us visions, showing us metaphorically in a way that is very intelligent what our current life situation is, what the lesson here is, or why we're manifesting this kind of experience currently. So once you, in a sense, have those experiences, you realize I don't need to abandon the ego, but it's a tiny part of the experience. It's a minuscule part. And I allow it. I allow the thoughts that arise, the thoughts of maybe jealousy, of maybe attachment to material things. Yep. Once you understand this is a tiny percentage, you start diving deeper into the self. From that moment on, when that communication starts occurring, we stop being afraid. So the solution is not what people try, for example, in certain traditions. Oh, I got to get rid of my ego. So suddenly I'm very hard on myself. I meditate on a super hard floor. I sit there for hours punishing myself. This is not the way. Yeah, this leads to just more ego. So
and a sore butt, right? Actually, it's funny you say that. I wanted to mention something about the posture and relaxation and gravity, and finding a place where you can check out a thought. Because first of all, the body is one of those portals to the now, where if it's ailing you, that's what it's gonna bring you into in the now, is your pain body. So it's a very powerful one too. You can't ignore it generally. I mean, it's like you think you can ignore a grain of sand in your shoe while you're walking. Well, it can be a lot worse for people. And everybody's experience in the body is slightly different based on where they are in their process, okay? Whether they were born with genetic problems or had accidents in their life, or they think they're living a perfect a perfect super structured state. It's all over the board what you look around across the planet. It's like I view it as the structure of their antenna, to the extent that they can receive the energy that's being broadcast through the electromagnetic spectrum. And it just so happens that we have nerve ganglia that can pick up some of those, it seems, about 7 of them along our chakras. So I guess what I'm getting at is there's stuff we can do. And one of those things that we discovered is, you know what, Julian, if you're not having a relationship with gravity, you're not getting any better, you're getting worse, because gravity always wins. And one of those things that led us to that was whenever you really look at a human, if their pelvis cannot be free and mobile, then everything attached below it and everything attached above it is going to be deviated. Because the pelvis is the focal point for your center of rotation around your horizontal axis. And because of the way we're designed up standing in the gravity field, if there's any deviation there, everything above it will be deviated. So the bottom line that we teach was you got to have a relationship with your bones as they come in contact with something hard. And you'll find through the changing of the superficial fascia and structural integration, that all of a sudden these little sacs around the bones, they start filling up back with fluid, everything gets soft. And even sitting on the hard floor, if your sits bones are in contact and you have a proper structure, you can sit that way all day long and nothing hurts. As a matter of fact, you'll find you prefer that to ever sitting on a cushion, because you can't find vertical anymore. It's impossible to sit on cushion, even, and this is kind of extreme, people may find this bizarre, but even think about, for hundreds of years, people slept on a pallet on the floor, where when they're laying down, gravity's having an effect on them, the bilateral symmetry of the shoulder blades, blah, 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 hitting the ground. Whether you know it or not, if you're uncomfortable at night and something's uncomfortable, you might turn and stir because of that pressure point of your body coming in contact with the ground. But that's normal. So then you have to ask yourself, if I lay on the ground and I'm uncomfortable, is that a problem? Is there something wrong with that? The answer is yes. In the horizontal plane, in terms of relationship of your body, if you can't lay on the ground and be completely relaxed on that plane with your structure relaxed on it, listen, most people cannot. I'm telling you, this is a fact. Is we need a relationship to the horizontal plane, to the vertical plane, and standing freely on our feet with gravity. It's an intense thing. So I'm joking around, but I never sit on furniture at all. I'm showing you right now. I only sit on the floor, and Chris is the same way. You can see over there. She sits on a mat too. We don't have furniture, and there's a reason for that, because we discovered in our process that cushions kill. They make you lose your connection with your structure. And I always wondered if that was done on purpose, out of comfort, or somebody didn't notice that, did notice that. But it's real. It's very real. So, look at Asia and the Middle East. You look around, they're always sitting like on the floor. They might have a cushion against the back wall, they're leaning against it, but it's serious business. As a matter of fact, I think Krista's going to do some classes on what we call gravity synthesis routines. And you ask yourself, oh, what's that? Well, imagine that if you just related your elbows to a flat surface and got them where they were rotating everything free, and then your shoulder blades, your knees, and blah, 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 and your heels or whatever. If you could do that on the floor, then when you stand up to the next level, it changes everything, because you've got a different relationship. So I don't want to dwell too much on that, but I know this is between you and I because of my past history as a structural integrator. But what I found is you've got to take responsibility for your body in relation to hard things. And when you do, guess what? When superficial fascia is free, you can lay on anything hard and it feels good. So it really helps with your meditations too, in it pretty much in any situation, Go ahead, go off on a rant.
Where the thing is, see, here's the thing, that is fine. It is very fine, because we are exchanging and we're giving perspectives. And for those who listen, when they see different perspectives and different approaches, for example, they can see what they resonate with. Yeah, what kind of approach maybe they take different techniques from different people or develop their own techniques. This is all in the name of creativity. It's tremendously important and beautiful. So, but I will put an emphasis on the following thing, is that all these techniques you have developed because you were shifting in consciousness prior. So what I'm trying to say is the following thing. If we try to abandon the ego, if we, for example, let's say we struggle with a healthy lifestyle because we're self-medicating in some form, because, well, society is neurotic. We're constantly compensating for not being in alignment with our deeper self.
Constantly.
Yeah, because that's what happens. We're playing right. So the ego wants to go one direction. The soul intelligence wants to get another direction. Guess what's going to manifest? Physical and mental illness, because you're not listening to your soul purpose. This is what's happening. So the thing is, when we start listening, in a sense, when we become intimate with ourselves and allowed to be intimate, is very important. If I cannot be intimate with myself, I cannot be intimate with anyone. Relationships as such are dysfunctional if I'm not intimate with myself. So as such, to face those fearful thoughts, face the experience of fear, face the experience of anxiety. Because the interesting thing is, once we are in full acceptance of them, we start transcending them and they appear to us illusionary at a certain point. They're still part of the experience, but we're not attached to them anymore. And then with the, let's say, arriving of soul intelligence as something that we can verify in our day-to-day experience, suddenly we become intuitive. We start developing technique, yeah, and you start doing structural integration. Some people develop certain forms of yoga, and they start developing systems. But the original source came out of the no-mind experience, where the intuition was suddenly kicking in. And to try to explain this, and I know this is very far out for a lot of people, but the thing is, you have more than this local memory that is trapped in this time bubble. So the thing is, what happened to me in the meditation process, that I would have gestures and ways of sitting and talking and doing things that were not Julian. And I was like, why is that happening? Because suddenly I was connecting into a data bank that is not localized in the brain. So I started remembering, in a sense, what habits I had. So at a certain point, I would naturally meditate without anyone having to teach me, because I already knew, but I needed to open myself up. I needed to surrender to the deeper me, yeah, by accepting the suffering, accepting the pain, accepting the fear, accepting the limitations. Because once you surrender to that, the deeper self, you allow it to start communicating with you. And when that happens, suddenly you find out techniques. I had clients, for example, sometimes, let's say, someone contacts with me because of something I wrote on the internet. And then I have people who suddenly go through a Kundalini experience, and then they find past life memory. And I had a call from someone in Iraq, for example. He suddenly finds out he has memory of being a Sufi. So that's powerful, right?
Yeah.
So then the only thing that we need to do is, for example, at first, be acquainted with the present moment, stop resisting to our fears. Because when you spoke about the pain body is a manifestation of our state of consciousness. So if I ignore the pain body, yeah, if I don't want to deal with pain, I'm going to suppress it. Guess what? That energy is going to find its way out in some other way. So then we add suffering to ourselves. So once I stop at it,
an opioid's not going to fix it.
That's exactly the thing. This is the reason addiction exists.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I wanted to bring it up.
Yeah. Even right. You see, even when practicing psychotherapy, I absolutely do not encourage clients to take any form of, let's say, present, or let's say, sometimes they have doctors who already prescribe things, and then they say they need to take it for a while until they're stable enough before they can get it out of the system. But in general, I do not encourage clients to take medication, because it is exactly this self-medication habit that creates addiction. When in truth, once you're able, for example, in meditation, you sit down, you relax your shoulders, your jaw, yeah, you stop clenching up, you stop tightening up, you stop fighting the experience. When you then find the pain in the body, you start meditating on it. The fascinating thing is that we start transforming it just by giving it awareness. Suddenly the energy that is trapped starts moving again. And once you work through the pain, at a certain point, the no mind comes. And suddenly you're pain-free. And your perception of time is one of just utterly nowness, timeless.
It kind of ruins
the concepts of past and future.
It kind of ruins you, though, when you're trying to be a good slave and operate your lower chakra level, be on time for work and all this kind of stuff. You realize it's all an illusion, you know, and it's hard. It makes it harder to go through the motions when you know that. Anyway,
but that's the point.
I know. I love
that's the point.
I love your focus on the concept of time, and that we are such time critters, and that, you know, it reminds me of an entire system that was set up to create pawns that do a certain function. That's the post-industrial era, right? I mean, let's groom them through this school, teach them to that. They go into this widget, earn that living, good to go, right? I mean, just complete widgets. And all of a sudden, you know, this period comes along where people are starting to wake up, and they're trying to wrestle with this reality that they've been caught in. You know, I wake up, oh, I got 3 kids and a job in this house, and oh my word, what is going on here? Like that.
Right. I had situations with clients. I give you an example where I kind of like assisted them to go beyond the ego. So, for example, there was a client who, let's say, would like to be an actor. Yeah, and he's talented in that area, but his socially engineered brain tells him, well, I got to make good money. I better be a lawyer, or better be a banker, or whatever. So, of course, the ego is not in alignment with the intuitive self.
I think that's very common. I mean,
exactly.
I think that's extremely common, because look, the reality is, you know, to be an artist or musician or something like that and try to make a living with the you know, the threshold of entry very low and all this competition, it's the reality. So they go, oh, I got to be pragmatic, and I got to do something that I make a living at, and then somehow keep alive this hobby that I love. I think that's really common.
Well, yeah, but here's the thing. We say it's pragmatic, yeah, but in truth, we are rationalizing our fear so our ego can stomach it. In truth, on the deeper level, we don't want to be that wage slave. We just don't. And we're not supposed to be. So the thing is, when we suddenly realize this, and this is how people come into crisis. See, the soul intelligence instigates the crisis. It instigates the conflict with the ego on some level. So then suddenly we realize, oh, we're suffering because we are afraid, and we try to fit in the system, but our deeper self tells us, well, this is not where we want to go. And then you have energies moving in 2 directions, and this is neurosis. It's that simple. It's not complicated.
Give me this funny image of these beings sitting on your shoulder going, I gotta make a living, and the other one going, well, now this is not where we want to go.
Right. So right. So here's the deal. So what did I say to this client? I said, do you want to have a 9 to 5 for the next 5,000 years? And suddenly he starts laughing. And I asked, who's laughing? It wasn't the ego that was laughing.
No. Well, I know, but the reality is, Julian, I got to share this with you. Like, for years, I'd get an inspiration. I'd have something. I wanted to do something new, try something new. And I'd be in it, doing it, really happy. And all of a sudden, I'd wake up with this thought and go, I really love doing this, but it's not churning any money. It feels like a hobby that's unsupported. I got to quit it and put it away and do something real, because the reality is, in the slave system, that mortgage is coming due, that payment's due. And those where the rubber meets the road is where you got to be. You know, so you can't live in this delusional place where I get to do what I want to do if it's not paying for itself, because that's how the system is set up. And that to me frustrates me more than anything, because it shuts down people's creativity.
Right.
But to have to rationalize to do something you don't want to do because what you are passionate about doesn't make money. Whereas if you were to put a football helmet on or a pair of boxing gloves on and go out and beat the hell out of somebody in a ring, that pays good money, you know. But doing a nice piece of art sometimes, hey, if somebody could take a photo with their cell phone and get it, you know, it's like, why do they want your art? You know, it's one of those things where, you know, what people have to offer may not earn them a way to make a living, and it's frustrating.
Well, the deal about it is, in a sense, when you say that, I understand that, because I want to be sincere to the people listening. Yeah, I'm not going to paint a picture of beautiful skies and roses, when in truth I have been struggling as well. Yeah, there were like often in this life experience I had tremendous issues because the system wanted to put me in places where I didn't want to be, and I would resist. Yeah, so when I would resist in that sense, of course they come down on you. This is what happens. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the thing is, but when you let that change who you are on the surface level, so the ego or the personality is a creative expression. You can, in a sense, condition or rewrite the programs in the ego or personality to match your soul purpose. Mm-hmm. So not to be in resistance to your ego, but to work with the ego, to integrate it into the soul purpose. Now the thing is, many of us are afraid. Now here's the deal. Understand you are an immortal being. You are afraid on the level of person. On the level of person, you're willing to sell your soul. That is the thing that we have been doing. This is what keeps the system alive as it is. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Because when the rubber meets the road, this is where people quit. And they quit because, and now they think practical. I got to pay my mortgage, I got to pay this, I got to survive. So survival of the biological vessel is exactly how they kept the system in place. They make you afraid of survival all the time. So they're telling you, if you ain't got health insurance, you're going to die, right? If you can't pay this, they're going to take your house, and so on and so forth. This is the story. For how long is it story? Mm. Can we stop believing in that story? Can we start focus on transformation? Because to be honest, and this is difficult when it comes to exercising spirituality, to really understand that it means going into those uncomfortable places. Mm-hmm. It means that. It means to face the pain. It means to face the fear. And to say, let's say if I quit here, let's say I have children, and let's say I want my children to be safe. And we do understand this comes from the level of love, right? But I might also use something that I find virtuous, for example, taking care of my own, as an excuse, so to speak, not to be brave, right? And my little cat here talking here.
I know.
A bit annoying.
Like, is that I love him. Is that the dark Faustian night of your soul walking behind you there?
He's wonderful. Well, he's wonderful.
Well, it's a very, you know, I think people don't like the system. They don't like the fear of, you know, if you don't buck up and be a good slave, that you're not going to have the resources to take care of yourself. And listen, I've had to face that too in this path, and it's been quite severe. And you know, the reality is, people who stand up for what's right in all generations that I've seen so far, they end up in the lion's ring or beheaded or die in prison or something else, because the powers that be don't want people bringing light into the system and waking the slaves up, because the slaves are there to be used to make money, and they don't really care about them. They're expendable commodities, you know. They're expendables. Just like in the movie, in the movie Jupiter Ascending, they were like, well, you know, it takes 100 of them just to produce this little vial of this elixir that we prolong our life with. Well, in essence, that's how the that's how the powers that be that are using slavery to do. That's essentially what it is. You don't really care about the outcome of what the pawns are doing, as long as the outcome benefits you, right? And that's never a healthy relationship. It's not a win-win in any way. So that's why I don't think it's ever been something that galactically is looked upon favorably, is slavery, the idea of slavery.
Right. Well, so let's speak about the state of consciousness that makes slavery possible. So the state of consciousness that makes slavery possible is the illusion of being separated. Yeah. By the way, let me get this adorable little old man, my little cat. Let me get him outside, otherwise.
Well, why don't we take a quick bio break and then we'll just come right back. I'll just put us on pause. Okay.
All right.
Perfect.
All right.
Okay. Be right back. Welcome back. You're with Gerald Clark and Julian Polzin, and we're discussing whatever comes to our mind. Actually, is a kind of a dialogue, and it's a lot of fun, right, Julian? You're one of you're one of the few people that doesn't have to have this formal host interview relationship where we can just bring up a subject and start pulling it, moving it around the goalpost like they used to do in ancient Greece with a dialogue. And for people who've never tried it, it's fantastic, don't you think? I walk away feeling intellectually very stimulated after a dialogue, because you're not trying to defend anything. You're just exploring and moving the ball around the court a little bit, seeing where it lands, right? Maybe it'll drop into this little convex peg right here, or hole, and that's where it's going to fit good. I don't know.
Right. So, well, what I'm trying to do is to allow this moment as it is, and to be a genuine expression of who I am right now. And as such, if I had pre-made plans, this is often something that we use because we're afraid. We think we need to attach to certain ideas and express them. When in truth, if I am very connected to this present moment, whatever comes. Well, and you will be genuine, right?
I don't want to interrupt you, but you mentioned that you use this technique when you're working with your clients, is that you aim to go into a place where you become a perfect mirror for them. And I think ultimately that is what I want to do with what we're doing as well. It's not that we're dispensing some magic nuggets to somebody that's going to fix their lives, but they can see through a mirror of us and how we communicate and relate and what's going on in our lives, that's possibly for them as well. Because I don't know about you, I go from one inspiration to the next. Like, I'll get this project and all of a sudden I'm all about it. I don't really know why. And sometimes I can't see to the end of where it's coming from. And the idea of inspiration, I think, is that concept of being connected to an intelligence source that's outside of yourself. The Greeks used to believe this, that inspiration came from the gods, not from you, from your own machinations. And when you find out that inspiration can be so powerful, it can practically burn you at both ends of the candle until you decide you need to care for your avatar. That's an amazing experience, and it's like being in the breath of the creator of all one event after the other. And I don't know about you, but I actually crave that, because I don't feel like I'm really doing my own thing. I found out was a dead end every time. You know, my will or your will, right? Somewhere in between, there's some compromise that we do this, but being the possibility of possibilities allows inspiration to come in, and you get utilized for whatever the good of you've perceived is. And that's part of being in the now, because like I was telling you before, if you stop and go, well, I'm making a movie or something, or I'm making this, or I'm doing that, and it's my inspiration, and it may not have any money tied to it. Okay, this is where it gets hard, because you go, well, if there's no money tied to it, I can't keep that thing alive, right? Because I got to go off to do this, and all the interruptions and things. And that's a very real thing. But if you can get to the place where your inspirations are not, you're not judging them, and they're just allowed to flow, they'll go from one to the next to the next, and it's absolutely magical. And it'll stretch you to your limits, mentally, physically. And listen, as you get older, the idea of being a get out of bed, be inspired about something, want to get up with whatever's going on in your life, it gets harder and harder and harder. I don't care what anybody's told you, but if you're not, and the less related you are to gravity, the harder that is. So,
well, so something that you said is very powerful. You spoke about the mirror, yeah, in a sense, trying to be a mirror. Well, the thing is, collectively speaking, the mirror of our state of consciousness is the society we live in. And the issue, in a sense, why we're being trapped in this matrix of fear, in this material-based system, is because of the illusion of separation.
Mm-hmm.
When you are inspired because you realize yourself beyond the illusion of separation. You find out, well, my consciousness is not limited to this body. There are other parts of me who are currently maybe physically not manifested, and I can get into communication with them directly. Some who are quite far evolved have telepathic experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Now the thing about this being is, you say, well, when the rubber meets the road, yeah, when we, let's say, we are inspired and we face the obstacles, because let's say maybe your inspiration is something that comes from deeper intelligence, but you're dealing with a very rigid system that has a sense of intrusion, because the moment you don't express yourself in the system based on the belief system that is socially engineered into people, suddenly the whole thing reacts to you as if it has an immune system, and you need to be corrected, you need to be this, you need to be that, and this is why psychiatry exists. I'm going to be straightforward about this.
Actually, you know what? Those people that, oh, I hope I didn't interrupt you there. But
Oh,
those
wait, there's
people,
something. Can I
those
finish
people.
the
Yeah, go ahead, go ahead,
next
go ahead.
thing? Okay. So the reason why I want to talk to the listeners about the illusion of separation, because we make practical decisions out of fear. For example, you think, I need to take care of my kids and family. Yeah, and you do this from a level of love, but maybe partially we also hide ourselves behind the illusion of virtue sometimes. Because the thing is, what kind of world are you leaving your children if you support the system? Yeah, because
I agree.
if we en masse act from fear, if we en masse say, well, I'm rational, I'm practical, and this is why I follow the system, then of course what we leave behind for the next generation, which is your children, they will have to keep dealing with this kind of system. So when we act from the illusion of being separate entities, we're not brave.
Mm-hmm.
Once we understand, well, we're not separate at all, and my consciousness is way beyond this body, so I can take the risk. I can face the system because I know ultimately maybe I die. Maybe I have to deal with certain pains. But if we don't do this, this system is so well engineered, it keeps reproducing itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the idea of, let's say, to find a minor escape in time, this is what people are looking for, minor escape in time. Maybe it's drug use, maybe it's making a little bit of money, maybe it's having the small spaces where they can breathe, but then they go back into the water and they have to stop breathing.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we, as a collective, come to an understanding? Compassion means I face the system, and from the level of my heart, I say, no, I'm not going to be reprogrammed. No, I'm not going to back down, and I'm going to face the pain. Because if we don't do this, the system repeats and repeats and repeats.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the deal. Once you know for sure, through direct experience, you are beyond this body, you realize the risk is well worth it. As long as you're trapped on the level of biological intelligence, your survival instinct will take over. And guess what? This is what the system does. It is designed to keep you trapped on the level of survival instinct.
I know. That's exactly right. I know. And the more you act from your intuition, facing your fears of whatever is usually holding the masses in complete abeyance. First of all, that you're going to be seen as a rebel, crazy, they'll put labels on you. But after a while, it's interesting that those ideas, if they have basis in the infinite intelligence, they don't go away. They don't go away. It's kind of starts 100 monkey kind of theory, and pretty soon, all of a sudden, more people that you know are talking about something you were talking about 10 years ago than you'd even ever believe. And it takes time. It takes time for these things to perturbate through the consciousness of the masses. But I'm starting to see signs, and there's probably signs every generation of some portion of the mass of the populace that's waking up to the overbearing I don't know, foul use of you as a pawn in the game to serve this tribal consciousness of, haves and have-nots, essentially. And they don't, it's terrible to wake up and realize that you're part of that, and you certainly don't want to be a perpetuator of that. But it does take someone who's willing to risk their flesh to walk a spiritual path. There's no question about that. You're going to get threatened. You're going to be made to hopefully respond like everyone else out of fear of the loss of your freedom or your life. And those are severe things. Okay. And most people don't ever want to face that until, it's way down the road and they're past their career and all that kind of stuff. That's when they want to think about, well, maybe I might die someday. But as well as I do, that visiting your grave early and getting good with that idea is what helps you live bravely and face those fears. Because the sooner you can do that thought experiment or that pragmatic experience of experiencing yourself as a infinite being who's having a material experience, better off it's going to be for you. And I don't think you can get it by reading about people having near-death experience in the hospital rooms, or even reading Robert Monroe's books about out-of-body experience, or all of that. I think unless you experience that perception change, it's not real for you.
Right.
So what you're talking about is ways to make that real for people. And I think that's very valuable, because ultimately the only way they can contribute to the higher good of all of us is to be at a higher level of consciousness than the slave reality that we've all been programmed into.
Right. And the thing is, many people who, in a sense, keep the system upright, so to speak, keep the structure in place, see, they're trapped on the level of ego or personality, but all of them are deep down tremendously beautiful beings. This is something that I've realized in practicing therapy, that once I really get into the process of allowing the other to be and to listen, so I see flowers unfolding themselves. But let's say as human beings, we wouldn't judge nature. We wouldn't look into the sky and see, well, that's a strange cloud. It should behave in a different way. But we're doing this with people. So once we realize that our so-called enemies, or the ones who keep the system in place, are equally confused, from that moment on, the emergence of compassion and love is possible. Because no matter who you face, if you face them with violence or conflict, in that sense, transformation is not possible. It just, in a sense, lead to another system of control. But we have precedents in overcoming this and transforming this. For example, with the life of Gandhi. Of non-violent resistance, where it was possible because India was a way more spiritual place than the West, and as such, collectively, they could do this. They could face the system, and since they reacted non-violently, see, an ego that wants to fight you needs another ego to fight.
That's right. Yeah, so that's funny you bring that up. I was just thinking about that the other day, how somebody could organize a whole community like that to respond, versus what happens on Twitter or whatever now, when you see 500,000 people going to a protest against something. If they only understood that they got lured into feeding the thing that they want to kill, that they want to stop, that they want to change. Instead, if they'd gone to a process seeking peace first and foremost, like what Gandhi was doing, as a movement, not in response to this event, so you're feeding that energy. It's a fine distinction, but it's very important. And I think it has a lot to do with the consciousness of the culture that it shows up in, because that's not happening. What you're talking about in India is not happening in the West. Not that I see.
Well, I would like to make a distinction that is very important between reaction and response. Reaction is something unconscious. Reaction comes from your memory. And that means, in a sense, the pattern, the belief system that's put in our minds. If we react from that emotionally, that is unconscious. But if I take a break, in a sense, a meditative break between something that happens and what's my response going to be, I can act from deeper intelligence. So the thing is, I think what is quite powerful with the transformation that happened in India, if you are a British soldier and you have no enemy to fight, how do you justify fighting? So in a sense, through the conflict, through the illusion of separation, through the, let's say, and only concepts separate us. The concepts of being part of different tribes, of being parts of different traditions, which is all software. It's arbitrary. It's interchangeable. If you're born in India and you're a Hindu, all right. If you're born in Europe and you grow up as a Christian, fine. The thing is, these softwares, depending on where you get born, in a sense, you integrate them. So once we go beyond that and we realize, well, the system needs someone to oppose, that's how they justify control. So when you fight them, they have a reason to impose control. Right. This is why we have all these false flag operations, certain terrorist attacks that are, let's say, CIA sponsored and so on. We don't need to go into detail. But the thing is, the reason is to have a public justification to put people under control and to take away their freedom to look into their intimate private life. So once we realize, when we peacefully start, in a sense, transforming ourselves, becoming peace, manifesting a vision, a creative, intuitive vision that does not come from the ego, it does not come from a place of fear. And if we do this en masse, transformation is very possible.
I agree. What do you think are the probabilities of that happening in our current state, Julian?
I think it takes work, but the thing is, I don't want to trap myself in time. Because if you think about, oh, there are probably 2,000 years to go, what you're going to do? You get into egoic thoughts and fears and concepts, and then you perpetuate the matrix, the system again. When in truth, you just need to be here right now. That's all you need to do. To be present, to allow, and to act from deeper intelligence. So transformation comes from within you naturally, without being trapped in concepts and systems, without being trapped in time.
Now, if Julian finds enlightenment and decides to come back to the earth and help, or ascend to a higher plane, what's Julian going to do?
Exactly what he's doing right now.
Is that right?
Yes.
That's good. What's next for you? Are you going to stick with psychotherapy as a way to interact with the public? Or are you going to write more books? What's next for you?
This is beyond the person. This is something that on the level of person I do not know, but there is a certain trust. There's a certain trust in those that communicate with me, that I'm in contact with, that this is exactly where I need to be right now. If that changes, it changes.
That's exactly.
If it doesn't, it doesn't.
That's the way it is for me too. And there's a little bit of uncertainty, but at the same time, stability and knowing that you're doing the right thing, whatever that is for you at this point in time. And that's all you can ever really do, right?
Yes.
We didn't have a map. We didn't get a practice run at this life. It's like, okay, does this feel right? Do I feel like I'm contributing? Do I look in the mirror and everything feels right, even though I know that's just an ego reflection of myself? But my higher self, using this avatar, is doing stuff that is going to have an impact on my community. And I don't think you can do much more than find your passion about whatever it is through inspiration, and then share that. And hopefully, being a mirror to your community, they'll see that's one way an avatar could live. I kind of like that, or I don't, whatever.
Well, something that you said is quite powerful. You said, and also Eckhart Tolle said that, by the way. So that's one of the main gateways is through the body. And the reason for this is, the system, through giving us constant input about, let's say, fabricated dangers, that keep us in a fearful state, keep us trapped in the thought process. So once we start shifting our awareness into the body, it's like we go out, we smell the flowers, we touch the grass, we maybe walk barefoot on the ground, get in contact with direct experience. At a certain point, when we are really in the physical experience, in the body, we feel what is beyond the body. That is the intelligence perceiving this input.
That's right.
This is why mindfulness is key. Right? This is how you let soul intelligence take, let's say, slowly express itself through you by shifting your awareness back into the body. And that's not complicated. Everyone can do it. You can consciously feel the weight of your coffee mug. You can smell the coffee. You can slow your movement down in order to not act from the programming. These are simple things that everyone can do, and they transform the experience.
Well, we started touching on that. Why don't we give out some practical things real quick to end this show for people? Practical things that Julian does, things that I do. You just mentioned one that we do that's really, you wouldn't think much about it, but having a concept of what your vertical line is and then taking it for a walk in a very relaxed, mindful way to experience gravity that you normally always ignore. And generally it means you're going to have to walk slower, feel where your feet are landing, and blah, 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 and play with your structure. That's not something that we normally do without looking crazy, okay? So pick an abandoned part of the neighborhood or something, but try it. And then another thing we do is to add a little bit of change to that experience. We'll take a little pair of hand weights. And we're not going like this, trying to shorten our muscles with them, but we might be moving them along lines and planes in the body while you're walking, to kind of open up your structure, to let the idea of the girdles, the upper girdle, the lower girdle, have a relationship through the pelvis to that place where you can feel gravity, okay? And it's not something most people feel or understand. They may think about, well, I feel heavy or I feel weight. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the field of gravity is vertical, and if you play with it as your body like a stick on a line while you're walking very slowly, especially with a little pair of hand weights, because it adds more tension or force to certain joints to kind of stretch them out. Think about it as an elongating force versus something you're trying to shorten your muscles with. And most people don't think about weights like that with resistance training. Right? So we do that, and we also play with our breath. And I know we're talking about some principles of breath work. Well, you talk about those first, and I'll talk about something like that. Talk about what you do in visualizing the third eye, awakening the energy from the coccyx bone and up, and also the breathing that you mentioned.
Well, the first basic technique, this is the foundation, this is what we build our house on. It's very simple to, in day-to-day situations, no matter if you're on the phone, if you're on the computer, whatever you do, to shift your awareness below the navel, into the lower part of the abdomen. Because if you do this, what we will do naturally, we will stop restricting our breathing. Because what happens when we're worried, our body has a fight or flight response. So what do we do when we, let's say, would face a conflict? We tension up our shoulders, we tension up our jaw, we make our body hard because we're building up energy to fight or run, right? And people are in that state continuously. This is why they get ill. So once we, in a sense, just shift our awareness to the, let's say, the part below the navel, and start really feeling the breath there, the whole body starts relaxing. And from that moment on, we become mindful. So, but of course, what you also wanted to talk about, we touched about this a little bit before we started the show, is like, when do we get in that, let's say, that some yogis would call inner engineering or alchemy? How do we start modifying the body so the intelligence that is beyond the body can freely express itself? But we got to understand that the physical body and the energy system has been conditioned through all the years of being part of this experience here.
I think we're going to do a whole show on that last topic.
Oh, yes.
We talked about that one. And maybe we'll save that for the next time, because it's so exciting. I know you're playing a lot. I can see it.
Right. Okay. So, but you asked me about the third eye, and let's say, before we can activate the third eye, being able to really breathe deep down into the abdomen is very important. Before, you won't be able to open the third eye.
I agree.
So the thing is, opening up the third eye is actually rather simple. It's just about closing one's eyes, and there's certain techniques I would suggest. One that I call is filling the cup, that you imagine once you watch your breath, it's like golden energy, or like a liquid starting to fill up the body until it reaches the point. Then you try to visualize pressing it out through the forehead. At a certain point, this part will start tingling and itching, and with further practice, what we can feel, there is an actually strong form of pressure or energy present. Another form that is very simple, you just shift your awareness here and wait until it tingles or itches. So once it starts tingling, it's very simple. We just breathe in, and with every out breath, shift our awareness to the tingling sensation, how we start charging up the third eye. It's not complicated. It just takes a certain amount of repetition. And from that moment on, once the third eye is active, we become intuitive. And then soul intelligence can express itself and start communicating with you. And interestingly, once my third eye was active, I had telepathic experience where it was shown to me how to do the Kundalini and all that. So first step, watching the breathing at all times, in the abdomen, not in the chest, because this is where we call, let's say, constricted through the thought process. Into the abdomen, activating the third eye. And then at a certain point, the Kundalini process is possible, which is about recalibrating the nervous system, reshaping the biological body to get rid of some of the limitations or restraints that this physical body, in a sense, puts on the soul intelligence, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, actually, coincident. I'll actually refine a little bit on the breath work. And you mentioned something in your writings that we discovered ourselves. Is there's, and if you really think about what's happening, it has to do with the balance between oxygen and nitrogen in your lung capacity. Breath work does something very fantastic with that, and it just so happens that just below the third eye in your pituitary, it was the pituitary gland right here. Yeah, that one.
Yeah, that's right.
Is right inside your nose is the concept of the Ida and Pingala nadi, and a nadi is an electrical connection that one of them represents energy of the masculine and one is feminine. The left side is masculine and is the Ida, and the Pingala nadi is the right side. So one of the things they do in Kriya Yoga is stimulate the nadis because they're so connected to your electrical body, okay? And as part of waking yourself up, paying attention, being mindful with your breath is fantastic. And breath work is, to me, is kind of like, initially, it's like the transient experience of drugs. You might get a short-term consciousness shift, but then when you stop doing that, it goes away. But it doesn't really go away because you're actually being changed in this process, is what I want people to know. So one thing that we do is every morning and every night, we do alternate nasal breathing, and then do the exact same thing that you were talking about. After we do that, and I'll show you how we do it. And then after you do that, then we do the visualization of bringing the sushumna, which is the energy at your coccyx bone, straight up that central corridor of your electrical conduct or your spine, through the chakras, all the way up to your pituitary gland. And coincident with that is one of the tingling sensations we get is when we play with gravity, is feeling gravity right on the top of your head. So whenever if you've ever experienced that, it's very coincident with your crown chakra, but it's gravity that has a huge impact on your energy body that people don't understand. I wrote about this in my Equation 5A in my first book and my second one, of what that looks like and what the relationship of gravity is to your chakras, okay? So after we do that, usually we can play another game where we'll do rapid breathing, just for a few. We can, in 5 breaths standing, I can take 5 deep breaths, and on the 5th breath, hold it for about a count of 10, and you better be holding on to something at this point. If you're standing and you're playing with your gravity line, you'll have such a powerful, energetic experience. First of all, your visual field will probably get really shimmery, and you'll lose your balance and possibly fall. And you can do this on only 5 breaths. It's so absolutely amazing. But this is called playing with the Rolf line, the gravity line, while you're doing a standing meditation. It's very different than, what they do with Zen, Zazen meditation, things like that. It's a different thing. But because your energy body is like an antenna, and at the bottom of it is your coccyx bone, the top of it is at the, well, if you're standing, if you put an antenna up in the atmosphere, right? Well, it's sending out the ions from the top of it because it's connected to the ground, right? And it's attracting the positive ions from the cloud. Well, your body does something very similar when you're in gravity field. So it's a trippy thing to know, but it's true.
Well, the thing that you're speaking about is alignment. It's, in a sense, it's a balancing act.
Yes.
I remember reading something in a book about Zen Buddhism where one teacher says, Well, there are 7 ways vertical, which is a reference to the chakra system, and 8 ways horizontal, which is the eightfold path of the Buddha within time. So the interesting thing about it is, in a sense, we start aligning those energy centers. Yeah? This is what I realized from practicing meditation while walking, for example, that if I stand perfectly straight and I drop my shoulders, walking becomes effortless because the antenna that you speak of is aligned in the perfect angle towards the gravitational pull. So this is something that you also find in Zen practice, that this is often emphasized. And for people, for example, who want to work with the higher chakra levels, it's very interesting when you face north, for example, and you align yourself with the electromagnetic field of the earth, right? When you face north and you do meditations on, for example, on the third eye, it assists the process. And these are things that we find out through practice at a certain point, and of course, it's great that we can share this. So you speak about the Kundalini, right? When, like, in a sense, a little bit higher than the tailbone, so to speak, like 2 or 3 centimeters above it. Once we have the third eye activated, we can focus on the spot slightly above the tailbone. We can also start charging it the same way with the out breath, as I said, that you can charge the third eye with the out breath. At first, it starts tingling, and at a certain point, when we really feel it, the experience of heat in the lower part of the spine. It's also what I experienced. It's a very strong sensation, so it's not an hallucination, it's an actual phenomena. And when we then visualize, for example, light moving up the spine, then we start pushing up the energy towards the crown chakra. And at a certain point, the crown chakra will be stimulated. From that moment on, we can, for example, visualize a light beam vertically coming down, penetrating the body all down the spine. It's very interesting. These visualizations, and I think this is powerful, these visualizations lead to the manifestation of that energy really knowing where to go. It's like saying, see, there's an address, you go through this door, and the energy knows and follows that visualization. At a certain point, when we really start feeling that energy, we don't need to visualize anymore, because we can directly move that energy with our awareness.
Exactly. So, you go from the technique to the direct pragmatic experience of, just doing the dishes. If you just are present in the now, doing the dishes, feeling where your feet are on the ground, being mindful and aware of gravity, it can be a cosmic experience, just like anything else, So you learn that you don't have to seek outside yourself to get the stimulus that is real, the inspiration that comes with a higher state of consciousness. It's very stimulating, and you don't really seek outside. Once you find that, it's like, wow, that's the best ever, right? Pretty much.
Well, there's a very deep truth, and this is for people who are still trapped on the level of ego. And again, when I say that there is no judgment, I feel a deep love for all parts of humanity. For those who are still trapped on the level of person a little bit, they will come in time, and at a certain point out of time, to the realization there's nothing beyond yourself. So if you seek beyond yourself, you follow the path of delusion. If you seek, for example, gurus that take the responsibility away from you to be on the path of self-discovery, this is not going to aid us. It's great to have teachers. Teachers and student relationships are beneficial for everyone, because everyone is learning. But ultimately, killing the Buddha is the way. And that means, yes, we can work with systems, we can work with structures, but realization is something that everyone needs to work on by themselves, and to realize deep down there's nothing beyond yourself. Once you figure that out, we stop delegating the responsibility for our consciousness to other entities, because this is exactly what gives the system power.
But it does put the heavy burden of awareness and responsibility directly on your shoulders, knowing that. And it's a burden of awareness that you can't shun it. I mean, it's not something you can ignore. It's real. You know what I'm saying? So.
I'm experiencing that too. And I'll be honest, when life manifests in a chaotic way, I'm also drawn into the person sometimes also drawn into the ego. But then I go back to basics. I stop doing advanced meditation techniques like Kundalini or third eye, and I just watch my breath. Always go back to the basics. When it gets confusing, reset. Don't try to accomplish something that currently, when you face limitations, the ego is not accepting limitations. So then the ego starts hijacking the spiritual path. Then I rather return to be present just now, letting go of the concept of time, letting go of the concept of person. And then the weight that we feel, in a sense, it's not there anymore. When you see someone who is severely suppressed, and you spoke about structure, right? And I also told you that, of course, the way our body expresses in a certain structure is an expression of our consciousness. You see depressed people, and when they feel very heavy, when they're very in resistance to the material experience, because they feel this weight on their shoulders, because they've created a story and they believe in the self-concept that they've created. Now they suddenly start manifesting it. It's helpful not to pay attention to the idea of responsibility that much. Being aware of it is all right. Yeah. But if you're really present in the moment, there is no one left to be responsible. There is no person that exists to shoulder that responsibility.
You bring up a good way that Eckhart Tolle used to talk about helping yourself when you get to the place where you want to have an experience of the now. And one of the ways was just stopping, looking around, maybe listening for the quietest sound, whatever it is to get you to stop, being with whatever you're thinking. It's usually past or present or future that you're tripping on. And one of the things he said was, just ask yourself, is there anything wrong in this moment right now? Like, is somebody trying to shoot me? Anybody breaking the door? All these fears that you're manifesting. But just really stop. Am I healthy? Am I breathing right now? I'm not choking. Everything's okay right now. Just get to that place, and then maybe you can calm yourself down to the point of, I'm still breathing, and then start paying attention to the breath, like doing some of the breath work. But just that, is there anything wrong right now? Why am I so upset thinking about this in the future, this in the past? Whereas you just realize that that's in the future or the past, it ain't right now. There's nothing wrong right now. It's me focusing on something else. And that often helped us a lot to cut out the outside influence of the matrix mind and get back to yourself. And you can
exactly
do that wherever you are.
Right. And once you figure that out, you realize 95% of all pain is mind made.
Story. The story.
Yes. Yeah, yes. It's the story that has the idea of a beginning and an end. Yeah. The Christians got that wrong when they said Alpha and Omega. There is no beginning, there is no end. They're just continuous now.
Yeah.
And whatever the now manifests itself. Yeah, it manifests itself in many different ways. But if you're not in resistance to it, you feel what is underlying the present moment. You're not trapped in those manifestations. You might look around and think, well, there are objects around me, there are people around me. But how often are these situations really dangerous, really threatening? If we think about it, we make very little experiences, usually, that really endanger our physical well-being. Most of the time, it's completely mind-made. We have the idea of a threat in the mind, and the body responds to the threat, and suddenly you are in distress. Yeah. So at a certain point, just to realize there might be pain, but suffering is something that is mind-made.
Absolutely. Do you want to come up with one last happy thing so that nobody's suffering, and then we could dive deep into that next show with a topic more about the physical changes to the structure, all that kind of stuff that you were talking about with the energy, the really deep stuff. But we don't want to start there. But there was one thing you mentioned. Well, I'm gonna just let you whatever comes to your consciousness. What do you think the people need to hear from Julian right now?
There's ultimately nothing to fear at all. Yeah. Problems exist within time, but once you realize your timeless self, there are no problems.
So I'm going to die with my inbox probably half full is what you're telling me?
Can you say that again?
I'm going to probably die with my inbox half full is what you're telling me, and that's okay?
Of course, that's okay.
Okay. All right.
You can also die not paying your taxes.
That's true. Or writing the last check to the mortuary and it bounces. You never know how these things work out.
Well, once we understand that all experience is constantly changing around us, but in order to realize the change, there needs to be an unchanging mind to witness it. Then you know there is no death.
Right. Right. I don't know. My thoughts about that are, it's difficult if you have children here that are still going through this matrix simulator, is whether you would choose ascension or choose to come back, and try to help them, in this process of incarnating and reincarnating. But that's something to chew on and think about. I think all of us have, especially as parents, have to think about that. So anyway, well, listen, I think it's been a fantastic discussion. We didn't really plan it out that well, and it turns out that's open to dialogue and letting happen whatever is going to happen now or say now. It works really well for us, so I don't know, I like it.
Me too.
Okay, so let's say bye to everybody, and I'm going to stop recording and we'll catch up with them next time. Okay. Right.
Yes, sure.
Okay. Oh, before we do, tell everybody where they can find you. Where can they find your information, your book, and stuff?
Well, most information is on my website. It's just Julian-Polzin.de. And I have an Instagram account. If someone is into spiritual teaching, I post frequently quotes from my book and new things I can come up with. I have a YouTube channel where I speak about the process of spiritual transformation, more in detail about techniques. So
yeah, you're putting some good stuff up there. I love your front cover pictures too. They're like talking memes that'll just hit you right between the eyes. Really well done. And you just started that not long ago, didn't you? So
yeah, the YouTube channel is fairly new, but I felt it was time to start making videos to share. Yeah, because of course, if you're inspired, to share the inspiration is tremendously important.
Okay, so Julian Polzin, Polzin, is your website. Is that right?
Right.
Okay, good.
Right.
All right.
And of course, but you already said it. The book is available on Amazon for those who want concrete techniques. And
here's Julian's book one more time. Can you see that? Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Beyond Psychotherapy, The Laughing God Behind the Mask. I should come up with a new mask instead of this Guy Fawkes mask. I've been thinking about some sort of Anunnaki mask of the sapient rebellion or something. I don't know. Anyway, okay, well, let's catch up with them next time. It's been a fantastic show, Julian. We'll talk.
All right.
Okay, bye.